There
Hey,
were
Whit.
many, and now there are two that are visible. Hi, Maria.
How are you?
Very well. So, hello, everybody. And I was thinking I was going to say good morning, but actually I should say good day, good evening, because it's all over the world. And we know we have people from everywhere. So, wishing you all the very, very best. Very excited about inviting you to this piece here that with Maria. My name is Whit Raymond, and I advise, I coach, and I guide people in really trying to manifest their vision. And it happens individually and collectively. And I'm just very, very pleased here to introduce Maria Escobar-Bordyn. So Maria, welcome here.
Oh, thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
That's great. So Maria is, for all of you who don't know, she is the president and leader at the Creative We Institute. And the Institute was created by Judith and Richard Glazer. And one of the last books and works that Judith did was Conversational Intelligence, for which this session has been titled. And that's why we're really blessed to have Maria here. The thing that I will just tell you, if any of you did not know Judith, she is what I call a giant of a human being. She was an innovator, a thinker. She was a servant, and she made things happen. And she just had a huge impact on so many people, and she did on my life as well. And the book, The Conversational Intelligence, is something that I have used repeatedly in my work. It's also been a guide for me. I sometimes look it up as a mirror, and I see myself there, and I go, oops, there's my edge, and there's some things that I can work on. So it's very fortunate that we're kicking this off with this. And I want to thank Cy for bringing this to the forefront here and allowing conversational intelligence to be part of this conference. And very wise of you, Cy, and I just think it's just wonderful. So it's really an honor to be here with you, Maria. And I thought as a way to get started, maybe you could just give us a little bit of background about you and your work, and then we'll dive in.
Sure. And I think that context can be a little bit of helpful. So I've been part of the Creating We Institute officially for the last 6 months or so, but had learned about Judith back in the around 2012 when I ran across a blog that she wrote. And she gave words to things that I already knew were important to me that I've been putting into place myself, which was about the importance of the nuance of language and how conversations and what we bring to conversations influences how things go. I come from a very eclectic background. I was thinking about this last night. As a person who went to 13 schools before I graduated from high school, and no, I was not a problem child. We just moved around a lot. But I've always been very curious and observant every time we move to a new place, trying to figure out kind of how things work around here, how people are conversing. Have lived both in the US and in Mexico, and learned that there are nuances to everything. And so I think I've brought this with me throughout my life. My work background has been spent the first number of years in Fortune 500 companies in human resources and OD roles. I have owned a children's bookstore for a while. I'm an avid reader, as evidenced by a small portion of my books, which are behind me. But I spent a lot of time in the consulting and advising world, working for some large consulting firms, as well as having my own businesses in some of the cities that I've lived in. And am just very excited to be part of helping keep Judith's voice out there and moving it forward. I'm not a Pollyanna. I don't drink the Kool-Aid on a lot of things, but there's so much that's relevant about what she says. And I'm excited to be part of this journey here too, and having conversations with you and with everybody that's watching and listening to us.
Well, I'm glad you don't drink the Kool-Aid, but at the same time see the power of what's here. So that's very well stated, and I agree with you. I like that very much.
Yeah.
Look, let's start here, Maria, if we could. I was just thinking about the quotation that Cy kicked off with, that Judith made, and as a way for doing this, here we are in this world that's you can always talk about what's going on. There's big upheaval, there's crisis, and depending on the language we use, we can have a lot of different things. So how do you see that quotation relevant for what we're dealing with today as a starting place?
Well, first of all, I'm really grateful, Sai, that you read that quotation, and I could hear the emotion in your voice. And in fact, it evoked a bit of emotion for me as well as I was listening to you say it, because it's a pretty profound quote, actually. But the thing that I think that's really important about what she said is it takes it connects the culture of an organization or the culture within a community down to the next most critical piece, which is relationships. But those relationships are impacted by how we hold conversations, both either one-on-one or within groups, that everything does happen through conversations. And I think what happens in situations like the ones that we're in, where we have had literally overnight had to completely change and shift how we are doing things, that we many times get caught up and focusing on some of the larger things or the more tactical things, instead of taking a moment and stepping back and saying, okay, well, how am I responding to this and what am I bringing? Because how I have a conversation with an individual, or how I have a conversation with my team, has huge influence over how they're feeling, how they're going to be able to conduct business, or how they're going to navigate. So it's really sort of starting with ourselves first. And I think our tendency, well, my tendency, I've been through a lot of changes, both in my work world and in my personal life. Whenever I'm focusing on external things, I don't navigate it so well. Yeah. So focusing on myself first, it's like, okay, step back, Maria. How do you want to be in this situation? And was probably the best learning and the hardest learning I had, and I wish I would have learned it earlier. But those are I just think the conversations are key. Conversations are key.
Yeah. And one of the things that, I mean, there's so much in what you just said. One of them is the theme of, I think about connection. When you think about going from the individual or self all the way up to the larger enterprise or society or the situation, that there's a thread there. Is that? Right,
there is. And that connection, well, connection is part of all of this. And one of the things that Judith said in over and over and in many different ways was that connection, that connecting is the most important piece. And then there's neuroscience, there's scientific research behind it that I think sometimes we don't necessarily think to pay attention to. You know, she talked about, and I talk a lot about, in fact, I talked about it before I knew as much about it as I do now. But when we are faced with uncertainty, our brains are wired to seek certainty and to seek and create patterns. They want to understand. Yeah. Our brain wants to understand patterns so that we know how we want to proceed. And some of those things happen in the background that we're not necessarily paying attention to, but they're also driving the kinds of conversations and how we are responding. So some of you, I know we have some CIQ people on the call, so some of you are very familiar with the concept of the amygdala, the part of our brain, the primitive part of our brain that's there really to protect us. So when we're faced with uncertainty, we do go into protect mode a bit. And for some people, protect means cocooning and not engaging. For others, it means controlling something. For others, it may mean something else. But when we're in that protect mode, we're trying, our body and our brain trying to survive. And as a result, sometimes our best self does not come out because we're not engaging the frontal part of our brain, our prefrontal cortex. That's a part of our brain that enables us to really do creative thinking, problem solving, and really have that, well, we can do this kind of response. And so I think understanding what goes on for us when we are in uncertainty and driving towards, you know, I can't control this, but I'm going to find something to control, that this, if we're not aware of what our responses are, anybody that we're interacting is going to be feeding off of our energy. Judith talks about a lot, and I'll say something about the statistic in a second, that you can impact a person's trust in you in 0.07 seconds. that you have an impact on a person. People will make a judgment about you in 0.07 seconds. Now, depending on what study you look at, there's a spectrum of what that time is, and it depends on each individual person as well, and their background and their physical history as well. But the point being, who we are, how we are behaving in the moment, has an impact on the person that's right in front of us. So if I walk in, if I've had a situation just recently where I got a little bit triggered by a particular situation, and I almost didn't step away, but I stepped away first because I thought, okay, how do I want to be in this situation? Because I know as soon as I'm in front of this person, if I'm feeling, if you'll pardon the expression, pissy, then her defenses are going to go up. So my influence over a person really is in how I'm engaging. So my strategy for myself is when I know that I recognize now when I'm triggered, and there's nothing, I accept with love that I can't change those triggers. It's going to happen. But that I take a moment and say, how do I want to be in this situation? And so I think even taking that small step for each of us makes a difference.
Yeah, it does. And then if you put that, so that could happen very situationally with another person.
Right.
Or you could have a world around us that feels totally chaotic, right? In crisis or whatnot, which can trigger all that.
Exactly. You know, there was a person I was working with a few years ago in a very large, well-known video gaming company. I won't mention who it is. But I was working with one of their senior leaders who had a history of leaving bodies in the wake. She was very good at what she does, but people just, ran for the hills when they saw her walking down the hall. And I remember when I first started working her, and this was a number of years ago, I struggled a bit in terms of how to help her move forward. I finally landed at the end of one meeting saying, look, you have one piece of homework. I want you to go pick a meeting this week that you're not running. But all I want you to do in that meeting is to observe. You're not to speak, you're not to add anything. I just want you to watch. And then let's talk about what you see. And all week I fretted, oh my goodness, I don't know how am I going to proceed? Maybe she needs more help than what I can give her. She came back and said in the meeting, she goes, is that what's going on in meetings? Because what she started noticing was how people were responding, their behaviors, their tones, their facial expressions. She was so intent on getting her work done that she wasn't observing the impact. And just that shift for her in starting to pay attention to what people were thinking and feeling completely changed how she interacted. So, I mean, she had more work to do on some other things, but her energy was causing those things.
Yeah. So, I love what you're saying because the power and role of being aware is a critical precursor or requirement for being able to make some kind of a change. So if I go into my fight, flight, freeze, whatever I'm going to go into, and I'm not aware of what's happening, then I'm just going to do whatever the tractor does, right? I'm just there. And so the question becomes then, you're also talking about that when people become aware, sometimes with that awareness, shifts can occur.
Yes. Well, in fact, for her, it paralyzed her temporarily because she said, I feel like I'm standing on the head of a pin because I don't know how to shift. I don't know what to do now because I don't want to have that impact. And so, but shifts can occur. I was trying to figure out earlier how to stop the chat from popping up on my screen, and I couldn't figure it out. So I've just been ignoring the little bubbles coming in every now and again.
I'm doing that too. It's there. I'm going, Whit, don't look at it.
Yeah. Well, but I glanced at it. I couldn't help myself, but I saw something about listening, and let me say, I do want to say something about listening because I think I'm a very practical-minded person. I love learning. I'm curious about so many things. I read so many things, but I want to see how it applies practically to what we have going on. And I would say a couple of things in this world right now. The first is most important, I think, is listening to connect. And I'm very specifically saying listening to connect as opposed to listening to understand. we are taught, we've all been taught, you know, to be a good listener, you need to make eye contact. You want to paraphrase. You make sure your body make sure your body language is neutral. That you've shut down your distractions, etc. Well, those things are all fine and good, but when we're listening in the listen to understand mindset, we're listening to facts, and we're listening to facts to either connect with those facts, or to reject them, or to prove our point. Instead, think about listening as an opportunity to connect. Listen to connect means truly setting aside any notion you have or opinion you have about what that person is saying, and literally listening to connect with them. And it's hard to describe it's hard to describe how to do that, but if you're really focusing on the person and what they were saying, we pick up things that we don't realize that we pick up. And so we're listening, by listening to connect, and Judith says it's listen to connect, not reject. And I would say listen to connect, not reject, correct, or protect, because sometimes it's about protecting our own position. And so what happens though is, you know, our brains are, first of all, for everybody, we think about, I have a hard time listening because I'm continually thinking about something else. Our brain naturally every 15, 20, 30 seconds, somewhere around there, is going to disconnect from that and come back. And that's just sort of our normal way of being. But if you're really, really listening to a person, you're not forming opinions as you are hearing it. Your curiosity opens up, and the next thing that happens when you're listening is to ask a question. We'll say more about that. So just doing those things help a person actually feel safe. That's that 0.07 second impact that causes a person to say, this is a friend versus this is a foe. And sorry, I could wax poetic on that for a while.
No, this is great. This is great, because there's a couple of things. There's the commonality. You talked about awareness before, and now listening to connect. And yet both of them require you putting attention to doing that.
Exactly.
And if you don't put your attention to that, then what happens?
Well, first of all, what happens is the person who is speaking knows that you are not listening. People can tell when you are not listening. I don't care how good your facial expressions are. They can tell when you've shut out, you've tuned out. And so then it impacts the level of trust that it can occur within that particular conversation or relationship. I want to give an example. I was right before mid to the third week of February, I was down in Brazil to work with a team, just as the whole COVID thing was exploding. And I was working with a team of leaders, and we were talking about the amygdala and the hijack and the prefrontal cortex. One of their biggest takeaways from there was that in the time of uncertainty, right? And I didn't say this came from them. I had them practice listening to connect, that they saw so many different things by just paying attention and actually granting them their own selves the grace that they were going to disconnect every now and again. But if they focused on the other person, trust was immediately connected. Two people who had not been getting along in that team at all, at lunchtime had a chat that kind of dissolved all the conflict that they had as a result of this listening to connect. So it can have a profound impact.
That's great. So there's a self-awareness, and you can do that through observation. And then there's also self-regulation, which is, for example, the whole thing about not wanting to get defensive, not wanting to. So if I can hear my own internal things that are distracting me, and I'm not really present with you, I'm not really listening because my mind's doing something else. Then I say, is my ability to regulate about there. And then we'll take this to this level.
Exactly. Well, and this raises something curious, because what happens when we do that, for some of us, all of a sudden I find myself thinking about myself, oh, Maria, doggone it, you've got to stop doing that. And then I'm over there, whipping myself because my brain did something natural. Yeah. Part of this, and this is something that one of the key learnings that I had from Judith, and this really gets into words create worlds. And I've been focused on nuance of language since I was a little kid. My family just drives them nuts because they say, you're nitpicking again. But the nuance of what we say is important. And so instead of saying, oh my God, I need to stop getting distracted and say, let me down regulate. Let me down regulate the cortisol. Right now I seem to be in a little bit of blame mode. Let me down regulate that and up regulate. What can I appreciate about this person? And just using that language, down regulate and up regulate, takes the guilt away from me, feeling like I'm doing something bad. We are perfectly imperfect. And there's nothing, we're never going to be perfect. But it gives giving ourselves the grace enables us to then not have an impact on someone else.
That's great insights, great advice. I love it. It's very, very powerful. Because I'm looking at our time, we've got about 10 minutes, and I want to make a little bit of a shift here because we've been talking more on one-to-one, but I would like to shift this also to talk about at a community or group or a team level, around the same things around connecting and communication. And how do you see this playing out or being manifest there? And are there specific things that you found work really well for creating the same kind of listening to connect and also awareness at the team or above level in communities?
Well, in a different time, I would maybe say something different than I'm going to say now. Right now, most of
now
the
you got
things
me interested.
well, because I'll put a semicolon after that and say, because so much of what we are doing now is virtual. We don't have the benefit as frequently as we might like to have face-to-face conversations. And when we do, we're going to be masked. And so there's differences there. But as I think about engaging with people on Zoom, for example, in video conference, I'm so grateful that we have the technology that enables us to do this, because it's possible to connect. But we connect in a little bit different way. And in our zeal, again, as leaders, our zeal to get people the information that they need and help them be productive and have them feel good. We're focusing on what work needs to get done. How can I help you get this done? What do you need to have? Instead of stopping and literally looking at them in the screen, leaning forward and saying, how are you doing? And what's going on, and allowing pauses in conversations on Zoom.
Yes.
So
that's so important.
Yeah.
It's so important. It's slowing down the pace so that people can have a chance to show up.
Exactly. Well, and heaven help those of us that are introverts, because we need those moments to speak up. And so silence is okay. Silence is more readily apparent on video cam. And it's all the more important that you let that silence be so someone can step forward. The other thing is how we one of my colleagues, who's one of our neuroscientist gurus, said it's great that we have video cam, but we connect differently on video cam because we're picking up just shoulders and above. And we're not seeing the rest of bodies, and our communication is whole body communication. And actually eye contact on video cam, when we're in a group, making eye contact for too long is actually painful, because we don't have other things in the periphery to look aside and sort of ground ourselves. And so it's just paying attention to, again, pausing, slowing down a bit, and recognizing that honoring where people are at the moment, and giving them space for that will help them be more effective.
And I just read on the screen, a couple of people are mentioning about called the fatigue that can happen with being on Zoom. And we see a lot. My wife was on a two-day conference on how you build cultures in the classroom in schools. And one thing, she got up and she goes, "Oh my gosh, I am so exhausted." I said, "Yes." And then she proceeded to read to me some neuroscience that says you need to take breaks every 10 minutes.
Exactly.
It's better than a 30-minute later. So I take this wisdom, and I think that would really apply to this new forum that we're working with. We need to take more breaks. So actually, Sai, I'm going to suggest we redesign the entire conference. We all take a shot.
Yeah, exactly. Break now.
Yeah,
Absolutely. But the other thing is, and it's not always possible, and I'm still figuring this
right.
out, that if there are opportunities to stand up while you're on a video cam,
Yeah,
or move around. I
yeah.
unfortunately am a walk. I do my best thinking while walking, and moving drives my family crazy, because when I have phone calls, my kids will say, "Mom, pick a room that you're not going to walk in, so so that we don't disturb you."
They just
But
get you a treadmill.
exactly. Well, maybe that's what I need to do. But no, figure out for yourself how you're going to be your best self
Right.
first,
Right.
because this is not self-centered, and it is not selfish. If you
No.
focus on yourself first, you are more in a position to be able to help others through this. If you understand where you're coming from and why you are coming from it, and then what strategies you have to bring your best self forward, that's going to have more influence on your team than possibly anything else.
So let's do this. Let's, as a way to wrap this up, just to get down to some more practical things. So this is,
Mm-hmm.
you've gotten so much out here, but I want to put it back into the thing that Cy set when he set the stage about
Mm-hmm.
that we're in this. COVID really triggered this. And if you think about it, think about the impact of the news, however you receive it on the social media or TV or whatnot,
Mm-hmm.
the world, our practices, our daily routines. We just talked about the conferencing and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of being able to be best for yourself, in terms of what you're going to be doing as leaders, wherever we are and how we want to reach out, what are a couple things of suggestions, guidance that you would say in this environment that would be something that we could use, that each of us could consider using to make ourselves more ability to be able to function effectively and grow in this world right now?
So I think I've been thinking quite a bit about this, because of course there are a number of different things, but I think it all boils down, I would boil it down to one thing that I think is most important, as a leader, or even as a team member, as you're engaging with someone, and that is taking a moment, a 5 seconds,
Yeah.
a few seconds before a meeting, to take a couple of deep breaths and just say, how do I want to be in this meeting? Uh,
Visualize it.
and visualize it,
Yeah.
and by saying, how do
Embody
I
it.
bring my best self? And because just putting that in your mind, when calms you, and then you go in with a different mindset. The one strategy that I use, and this is going to sound maybe silly, but it works for me. My youngest son, he's an adult now, still lives at home. He's got on autism spectrum. And he's got speech issues. When he was 11, he left me a voicemail at work one day, and it was this: "Hi, Mom, this your son, Escobar-Bordyn. Me dad want to know when you're going to be home dinner. Call me. This your son, Escobar-Bordyn." Click. And I left that voicemail on my work phone it was on my phone for years. I
Yeah.
came across it once accidentally when I pretended to be on the phone to avoid somebody who had just triggered me. I went and just listened to my voicemail, and there was his beautiful little voice. And I listened to it, and I over and over again. And literally, when I'm going into something difficult, the first thing I do is I know the exact message. I listen to it in my head, and it completely shifts how I go into that meeting, sort of that oxytocin.
That's
The
great.
oxytocin.
That's great.
So that's what I'd say. 5 seconds before you engage, it will shift things for you.
Maria, this has been wonderful. I feel like I've got all these questions I want to follow up with about
I
priming and all
know.
the stuff you're getting at, but I want to thank you so much for this. This is really wonderful, wonderful wisdom, and it's great to have you with it. So,
Thank you. It's been great.
okay.